This is the lesson where we're going to be bringing together all of the previous lessons and building out a really cool mini application. So first of all, for this application, we're going to need some inputs, because what we want the user to do is to be able to input a value and then check to see if that value is odd or even, and then output that within our HTML. So I've cleared out all of the content and we're starting out completely fresh. So first of all, let's create a div, and we're going to create a div, and this is where we're going to drop our output. And we also need an input field, so this is just type and regular text input, or actually this is going to be a number, so we'll set it as type number, so that's with HTML5, you're able to do that. We can also give it a name, so it's the same thing that if we're submitting it, we'll give it a name of my num. And we'll also use some more HTML5 attributes. So we've got a min, and we've got a max, and so on. And let's set a default value. So we'll start out with a default value of 4. So the next thing that we need is we need a button. So we need a way to be able to, something that can be clicked that we can actually check to see if that value is correct. So let's do type, and type is button. And we can also give this one a name, or we can give it an ID. So let's give this one an ID, and we'll call it test button. So there we go. So that's for our HTML, and that's all we really need to do for the HTML. So what we want to happen is we press the check button, and that invokes the JavaScript function in order to check to see if this value is odd or even. So let's try that out. So within the script, there's a few variables that we need to set. So first of all, let's set a const for our output, and we'll give it a variable name of output, and we can do document. And this time let's do get element by ID. So that's another commonly used one, and if you're just using IDs, then this is probably one of the easier ones to just grab that element. We can also grab this button ID, so let's do const. I usually like to call them the same thing as the ID, and we'll do get element by ID. And then this one is called test. So on test btn, we're going to add an event listener. So the event that we're going to listen for is a click, and the function that we're going to invoke is check value function. So we can close that off. And now let's create that function. And we don't have to pass in any arguments. And so for now, usually when I create the functions as I'm building it out, I like to just to make sure that everything is working as expected. So when I click the check button, it's invoking the function, it's outputting it within the console. So that's perfect, exactly what we wanted. So next, what we want to do is we want to get our temp value. So we can just call this val or whatever we want to call it. In this case, document. And in this case, we're going to use query selector. So I did say that was one of my favorite ones. So this one's a little bit more complex because we know that we've got an input, we've got a type number, we don't have any IDs, we've got two different inputs there. So it's a little bit harder to grab this one. So there is a nice way to do that. And the reason I'm showing you this because this is also really useful within JavaScript. So we've got our input, and then we can specify what values are contained within that input. So we can do name. We'll grab all of the inputs that have a name of my num. So that's our current value there. And we might as well just grab the full value at the time. So console log out val, just to make sure that everything is still working properly. So let's change the value there. And for some reason, it's the JavaScript's not working exactly, or the HTML isn't working exactly, and I've got a max value of 0, and that is probably why. So let's refresh that. So now we're able to increment and decrease our values. That's HTML5. So great, our values are being shown within the console. So we're literally just a few steps away from being able to finish up this application. And it's going to require a parameter, an argument that gets passed in, and that's going to be a number. And what we'll do is we'll console log that number that gets passed in. And over here, what we'll do is we're going to do num checker. And I'm making it a little bit more complicated than it has to be, but we did want to get into the practice of all of the stuff that we're doing here. within JavaScript. So next thing that we can do is we can do inner HTML, and we could also add this into another function as well. So we're going to output the inner HTML of whatever is returned back from num checker. So let's return back a string value of nothing yet. So let's see what happens. So we just get nothing yet. So what we need to do is to determine whether num is odd or even. So if we go back a few lessons, we had a value that we had of being able to check if a number is divisible by another number and if there's a remainder, and that was the modulus. So if we take num and if we do modulus of 2, what do you think is going to happen here? So if there is a value here, then this is going to come back true. And if there isn't, then it's going to come back false. So let's set up a variable, call it message. And for now, we're just going to set that as blank. And then in here, message is going to be, and then let's use else. And then what we're going to do at the end of the function, simply going to return back message. So let's try that out. Even, it was odd, it was even, and so on. So any number we enter in there, it does the check to see if it's odd or even, and by determining if there's a remainder, and that's the thing with the true or false as well, the Boolean values, so they can be ones or zeros. So if the remainder is 0, which it would be if it's an odd number, or if it's an even number, then there's no remainder when you divide it by 2, and that's how we know that it's even. And if there is a remainder, it doesn't matter what it is, we know that it's odd. So that's how you can build out a simple application using all of the functionality that we've tried and gone through in the earlier lessons. So now it's up to you. Try this out for yourself. Get comfortable with making selections of the various elements on your page, getting values that are contained within them, and then also updating those values that are contained, and doing all of this using JavaScript. Also incorporate functions where you can, apply conditions as well where you can, and see what you can do with JavaScript. Thanks again for taking the course.